Hi, I'm Seth Patterson, Seth the EFI guy, and today we're working on our Dodge Ram project again. It's installing these wonderful Holley gauges. I love these things because they are easy to install, they're not easy to program if you're trying to read the instructions. I've never done it before, but that's why I'm making a tutorial to hopefully make them easier to program for you. And they literally will cover every single output that you could get to any Holley LED screen or any other gauge you could possibly want to hook up. So very cost-effective way of getting some gauges in your car, and very simple wiring. This is the gauge itself. If you've never seen one outside the box, kind of a matte black that is the actual cover. These are the programming buttons. Comes with little stickers to let's see, well, you've got all your nitrous, whatever, but you got your AFR, miles per hour, KPA, gear. There's, I don't know, 30, 40 different stickers in here, so you can put a label on it. Part number 553-100 for your reference. And I guess now I'll just go over very quickly. The wiring could not be simpler. The black wire goes to a ground, the chassis ground. The pink wire is an optional wire for headlights for dimming. The white wire is a 12 volt ignition on, key on 12 volts. And the white wire with the black stripe, get it out here. The one wire that comes with the pin already connected is the white wire with a black stripe. Is going to go to your J1 or P1, so your very first connector on your HP or your Dominator, pin A15. That pin should always be open because that pin's reserved only for these gauges. And if you're doing only a single gauge, you're just going to wire it exactly like this. Stick this into pin A15 and you're done. If you're doing multiple gauges, I'll show you, it's super easy. You're just going to splice all of your black and white wires to a single wire that will go into that pin, and you're done. That's it. So if you have 10 gauges in the car, I don't know if there's a limit how many you're going to have. On this vehicle I actually have 5 of them, but all 5 of my black and white wires are going to be single splice and single wire coming out of the ECU. Really simple. So I'll show you how to do the install now and how to program it. If you're doing more than one gauge, you're going to end up with a lot of wires. You don't need a lot of wires. You're putting, let's say, 3 gauges into a cluster. In this case, I'm putting 2 together up here. So I have 2 harnesses I pulled out of the box. I'm going to give it about 6 to 8 inches just to space them out. And I'm going to cut one of these, so leave about 1 inch between just for a cleaner install, and that makes life much easier. So really you're only wiring in, when you have a cluster of gauges, you're still only wiring in 4 wires into the car. The other wires, whether you have 4 others or 8 others, if you have a cluster of 2 or 3, are going to be all soldered together onto the single harness. Just stripping off about 3/8 to half an inch of wire off of my cut wires. Now what I do is line them next to each other. Take my longest wire first, find the corresponding color, in this case it's white, run them down next to each other so they run out the same length. Then I use my, I don't know what they call this thing, maybe a Universal stripper, though that sounds like it brings up ideas of other things, but let's just call it the stripper. I take my stripper, open up a spot on here, you really want to get fancy, you can open that up and stick it through, but it's our gauges. Wrap it around, and I'll do that on all 4 of the wires, and then put some solder on the end of each one, and some heat shrink over it, of course. So while I'm doing this, I'll talk about, I don't know why I have to sell you on this, but I'll just talk about why I really love these gauges. Because when people come into Performance Shop and they say, okay, how much to install 3 gauges? And I figured out my rule of thumb is that it's 2 hours per gauge. 2 hours for 1 gauge seems okay, but when you say, okay, you have 3 gauges, it's going to be 6 hours. People are like, are you crazy? I'm going to pay 6 hours to install 3 gauges in my car? Well, yeah, honestly, because I don't know what 3 gauges they are. Chances are they all go to a different spot. I have to install the sensors in the engine. I got to run wires from the dash to these different sensors, no matter where they are. Some of them need various different, well, I guess they all need like a power, ignition on power. They all need a ground, so you can try to put some wires together for that, but realistically, it actually takes, to do a good job, it actually takes 2 hours per gauge when you do a typical gauge install. On these Holley gauges, your sensors are already in the car when you installed your ECU, and the wiring could not be simpler. They all go to one place, so it really takes the same time that would take to install 1 conventional gauge to install 3 of the Holley gauges. I know I busted out the fancy tool here to hold my wires in place to solder them, but you really don't need a fancy tool. You can just set these somewhere where it's not touching something else, or ask your spouse, partner, whatever, anybody in the house that has opposable thumbs, to hold these while you're soldering it. Or if you want to do a lot of soldering, buy yourself one of these little clampy doodads, because it really saves a lot of time. And a gas-powered Portasol, because I've tried like at least 4 or 5 different brands of these portable soldering irons, and this Portasol one has lasted me now longer than the rest of all of them combined. Cool, eh? Well, let's hold it into the camera. Ready to install in the vehicle. Okay, after the gauge is installed, you power it up for the first time. When it's unprogrammed, it's going to be on this ST1. I believe that stands for setup or setting or something. And now let the programming begin. First thing first, I want to say, is you need the instructions. You will still need to refer to the instructions, I'm sure. And this sheet here, which is kind of the, what would you call it, the legend for your parameters, always keep one in the car or nearby, because if you ever want to change your gauges, you're going to need this. Laminate it, put it in a book, do something, get it tattooed on your arm. But you are going to need these numbers to change your gauges if you want to in the future. So let's get into programming mode. I'm going to take both fingers, both thumbs, hold down both thumbs together until it goes into program. The first setting, 000, the default, as you can see from here, is engine RPM. Now this is an oil pressure sensor, so we're going to go down the list until we find oil pressure 021. We use the left button to scroll through the numbers. I'll leave that one at 0. We bring this up to 2. The right button walks or moves the numbers incrementally up from 0 to 9. Once that's in, we press the left button again, it moves on to the second one. Now here it's saying number 2, as this is the second option. The second option is the full brightness, or the daytime brightness, of the LED, the background, the numbers. Unfortunately, it doesn't kind of show you what the brightness is alive, but I like them nice and bright, so we'll leave it up at 9. The third setting is the brightness when the headlights are on. That'll take a little trial and error. The fourth setting, is the mode. So the mode is on the back side of your sheet. Let's just take a look here. All it changes is the colored LED outer circumference. Kind of the default that it's in it is number 1, which is, I think you can, it's pretty kind of hard to put in words. I think that's why they put photos here, but at your 0%, at your 25%, at your 50%, at your 75%, and at your 100% of whatever you program in there. So it's not necessarily 0 to 100, it's a percentage of what you are using. Let's say coolant temperature, maybe, and this is programmed in, you're going to understand it a little better, but let's say coolant temperature is 32 Fahrenheit is your lowest. 32 Fahrenheit is 0%, and let's say 250 is 100%. Then everything in between is going to be right here in between, so your 180 is going to be somewhere around here. And these are the other options, but you can just scroll through number 1 through 8 on those. I leave them at mode 1. So the next setting, when we hit the left button, because we're not going to change anything here, the next setting, now we no longer know what number we're on. The last one was step 4. We're actually on step 5 now, but from here on out until the end, there's no indication other than some visual cues to tell you where we're at. So try to remember what setting you're on. This is number 5, which is the lowest expected range of your setting. Now this being oil pressure, my lowest expected range is very simple, it's 0. So 0, 0, next. Now this is where it gets more complicated. The numbers are broken down because you could go all the way up to 99,000. Those first 2 numbers were the thousands. The second numbers are our 100s. So if I put a 1 here, that's going to be a 100. And if I put that 1 by mistake, I'll go back to 0. If I put a 1 here, it's going to be 10. So we haven't changed modes yet. All we've gone is from the thousands place to the hundredths place. And if I put a 1 there, it's number 1. Now, notice your decimal. This is a decimal. If you have something, for example, air-fuel ratio is kind of the only thing I can think off the top of my head where you would have a decimal. 14.7, 13.2. If you have a decimal, these are where your decimal places go. And again, I'm leaving the lowest expected oil pressure at 0.00. Highest expected. What's my highest expected oil pressure? This is how we set up the percentage. I don't know if you've picked up on that yet, but the low our high. So this is our highest expected. Right now, because the default programming in this is for RPM, this would be 8,000. So I'm going to take that 8,000. I'm certainly not going to have 8,000 psi of oil pressure. I'm going to set that at 0. Now here's our 100 spot. My highest expected oil pressure is about 100 on this truck. To be safe, I think I'm going to go to 110. No decimals, so I continue. Next, what's my lowest reading? And this is where the setting is, when you turn this gauge on and it's going to show this dot right here, what is the lowest reading? So you're kind of repeating what you did before. It just cannot be any lower than the lowest expected. You're getting an error. So once again, I'm leaving it at 0. When my green light comes on, now this is oil pressure, so my thinking is anything below green would be in the danger zone. Everything above green would be okay. So I'm going to set this. Again, this is the 1,000 spot. It was set up as 2,000. I'm going to set my low here to 20. No decimals. My mid-range. What's this thing going to run at most of the time in the mid-range? It was set at 4,000. Set that at 0. Set that at 0. I'm going to put it at 45. No decimals. The high range. This was set at 6,000. I'm going to set this at 90. No decimals. Continue. And the max. Again, what did we set the max at before? We set it at 100 and... well, my memory's bad. It was 110 or 105, but you want to be below whatever the expected max was, so I'm going to put 105. I think before I put 110. End. Wow, that was it. And as you can see, it's 0. Let's actually start the truck right now. And there we go. You might have noticed how long I had to crank that, and I think I mentioned this in another video. I have the fuel pressure triggered now on oil pressure to try to get oil pressure built up into the engine before it actually starts. So, oh, you thought I was done? I thought I was done too. Two things occurred to me. The one is that on this oil pressure gauge, it made a lot more sense actually after I thought about it. Instead of being in that mode 1 here, I selected mode 8, which, scroll through the rest of this, get to the end, means that at 0 psi of oil pressure we have the most warning lights on, and at our max of 100 or 105, 110 psi of oil pressure we have no warning lights on. So mode 8 made a lot more sense there to me than mode 1. Yeah, if you have to change one thing, I think you just have to keep scrolling on through until she hits end. Okay. Just one note on, two notes I guess. One, on the AFR, when you see those 3 dots, it means your sensors are warming up. And the second note, boost PSI. If you are using a supercharged setup, and you set your gauge for boost PSI, it's not going to read anything. You have to load the boost control ICF in order to read boost in PSI. You can read MAP, which is the manifold pressure, which is what you're tuning in anyway, and you should probably just learn those numbers anyway. You can set that up, but if you want to see the traditional American boost pounds per square inch, you have to load that boost ICF.